fire. It's like mesmerizing, but also kind of terrifying. It's been with us since, what, forever. But in South America, man, it's a whole different story. It's about traditions, challenges today, and some real head scratchers too.
Absolutely, like a woven tapestry, You've got indigenous groups, they see fire as something sacred. Then there are farmers dealing with the whole slash and burn thing their ancestors did. And of course, the darker side, arson, pyromania. Even the way climate change is making things
Right,
worse.
no doubt.
Yeah.
So we've got a ton of articles for this deep dive, everything from like anthropology to environmental studies. When you look at it all, what really jumps out at you?
Well, it's the different ways people see fire, For a lot of indigenous groups down in South America, it's really deeply connected to their culture and their spirituality. It's a gift, something from the gods, a force of like creation.
Yeah, I was reading about that. They even have these fire guardians, right? Like their job is to take care of sacred flames. That's a heavy responsibility, huh?
Totally. And they know a ton. The proper rituals, how to use fire for healing, for ceremonies. They're carrying on traditions that have been around like forever.
Wow, that's amazing. But I got to imagine that this reverence for fire, it's got to be tough with everything going on, especially in the Amazon with deforestation and all that.
For sure. It's a real dilemma. How do you balance those ancient practices with the need to protect these incredibly delicate ecosystems? A lot of these communities, they're right there on the front lines fighting for sustainable ways to manage the land, but in a way that still respects their traditions.
So it's more than just putting out fires. It's about understanding how they used fire sustainably for centuries and finding a way to make it work today, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And that takes us to a whole other thing, fire in agriculture. Our articles talk about the long history of slash and burn farming in South America. It's been the way they survived for generations, but there's a real environmental cost.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. You clear the land, get rid of pests, but then what? Deforestation, soil erosion? You're adding to the very problems you're trying to solve.
And you can't just tell people to stop. It's part of who they are, how they make a living. Researchers and policymakers, they're trying to figure out how to help people move to better farming methods without wiping out centuries of knowledge.
Some of the articles mention things like agroforestry, mixing trees and crops, and conservation agriculture to minimize soil disturbance. Do you think those have potential?
They do, but you have to be sensitive about it. You can't just force things on people. The good news is that there's this movement to bring traditional knowledge and modern science together to find solutions that really work long term.
Yeah, finding that sweet spot, tradition, progress, taking care of the planet. It's a lot. But getting into these articles more, there's this whole other side of fire, right? The part where it's used to destroy things on purpose.
Sadly, yeah. Arson. It's a huge issue in parts of South America, and the reasons behind it, they're complicated. Sometimes it's about grabbing land, sometimes revenge, and sometimes, well, it's just plain vandalism.
It's awful thinking about the damage. Whole ecosystems, people's homes, livelihoods up in smoke. And one of the articles mentioned they often do it in the dry season, making it even harder to stop the fires.
Right, it's like this scary trend. It used to be, even with land clearing, people understood the consequences for nature. Now, with all this crime, it's like they don't care what happens to the environment or the people who rely on it.
Which kind of leads us to another fire thing, pyromania.
And this is where it's really important to separate things out. It's not like arson for profit or revenge, right?
Right.
Pyromania, it's this psychological thing. It's an urge to start fires, and they can't control it. Not about being mean or greedy. It's this compulsion they often can't even explain themselves.
So they feel like they have to do it? But then, didn't some of the research say they feel awful afterwards, like super guilty?
Yeah, absolutely. It can really mess people up. And for a long time, nobody really understood pyromania. But with all the new stuff about the brain, we're realizing there might be connections with how their brain chemicals are. Especially dopamine and serotonin. Those affect things like impulses and how we feel reward.
So there's a biological side to it, too. It's not just a choice they're making, huh?
Right. Doesn't make it okay, of course, but it means we can maybe treat it better.
Huh.
There's cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. That seems promising. Helps them figure out what triggers them, how to cope in healthy ways. Early help is key, though, just like with a lot of these mental health things.
It makes you think, there's always more to this story. Speaking of which, let's talk about the fires that happen naturally, not started by people. We always assume it's us causing wildfires, but lightning's a big one, too, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Actually, in some places, especially really dry ones, fires from lightning are part of how things work naturally. Clears out the dead stuff, makes room for new plants, even puts nutrients back in the ground.
Nature's reset button, almost. Although, something tells me climate change is pushing that button a bit too often these days.
Yeah.
And way harder.
100%. This is where it gets serious. Climate change, all that stuff we're doing, it's upping the chances of these mega fires all over the world. And South America, it's really vulnerable.
We were talking about things being hotter and drier. That's the big connection with climate change and those megafires, right?
Oh, yeah. Huge. It's like, imagine a campfire. You've got those logs, bone dry, ready to go up in flames. That's what's happening in South America. The hotter it gets, the longer those droughts last. The whole forest is just waiting for a spark.
And it's not just how often they happen, right? These fires are burning way hotter now, too.
Totally. We're not talking about those regular fires that move slow. These are massive, exploding almost, spreading so fast. And they're just enormous, burning hotter than ever, releasing tons of carbon dioxide. So it just makes climate change even worse, like a terrible cycle.
It's mind-boggling, the sheer size of it. And like we talked about before, it affects everything. People's health, the animals, even the climate of the whole planet.
And we can't forget about the economic side of things either. People lose their homes, their jobs. Entire communities have to move. The damage to buildings and roads, it all adds up. And we're just starting to understand how bad it really is.
Which I guess is a good point to bring up this next part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot, right? How fire is important in those cultures, the problems with how they're farming, the scary stuff with arson, pyromania, and climate change making everything worse. But what about closer to home? Like the accidental fires that could happen to anyone.
Yeah, it's easy to think, nah, that won't happen to me. But honestly, it can take one little mistake. A broken appliance, a candle you forgot to blow out, even a cigarette butt, and suddenly, boom, disaster.
It's like that saying, fire's a good servant but a bad master. We need it, but man, it can destroy everything in a flash.
Exactly. We have to be so careful, Pay attention to the things in our homes and workplaces that could be dangerous. Take precautions.
Yeah.
And have a plan just in case,
Sounds like the more you know, the safer you are.
Yeah.
If we get how fire works, the risks, how to prevent it, that's how we protect ourselves, our communities, the whole environment.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think really that's the big takeaway from this whole deep dive. Fire, it's not good or bad, It's a force, a tool, and it's up to us to use it the right way.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So wrapping up our look at fire in South America, from those sacred flames with the fire guardians to those crazy wildfires from climate change, here's something for you to think about. Can we take that ancient wisdom and the new stuff we're learning and actually protect South America? With the climate changing and fire always being a threat. Thanks for exploring this with us, and we'll see you next time.